Study on every king of Israel, and we're following the good line of kings, the kings of Judah. And 1 Kings 22, the last time we were in this, or we're looking at the king of Judah named Jehoshaphat. And the last time we were in our studies, we saw that when he took the throne, he led Judah into really a massive revival. He began to appoint men to teach the book of the law throughout the land. It was a good thing that he was doing, and he was a good king and a godly king, and he feared the Lord, but he wasn't without flaws. Because in this chapter, we see where Jehoshaphat allies himself with Ahab, the king of Israel, or the northern kingdom. And he was the most wicked king of Israel. And what we see here, that Jehoshaphat ends up traveling to Israel to visit Ahab, and he gets pulled into a war that really wasn't even his fight. So Jehoshaphat made an alliance with Ahab, and because he made an alliance, he was pulled into a fight, a battle, that wasn't even his to fight. And I think the summary of this, one of the lessons we learn from this chapter, is that when you align yourself with the world will end up using you for their cover. And you'll end up taking fire that was meant for the enemies. And we'll see that play out in this chapter here. So let's read a few verses. Let's get the context here. And I know when we were studying Ahab, we went through this chapter. So a lot of the things are going to overlap. Hopefully it will refresh your memory of the things that we covered when we were looking at Ahab in this chapter. But we're going to be looking at Jehoshaphat. But we got to cover a lot about Ahab. So 1 Kings 22, let's begin in verse number 1. And notice what it says. And they continued 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. And it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, Know ye that Ramoth in Gilead is ours, and we be still, and take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria? Now let me just make sure we're all on the same page here. In verse 3, when it says, and the king of Israel, is talking about Ahab. Ahab's the king of Israel. Jehoshaphat's the king of Judah. All right? Verse number 4. And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle to Ramoth Gilead? Will you join in this war with me? And Jehoshaphat, the godly king, the good king, said to the king of Israel, notice his words, I am as thou art, my people as thy people, my horses as thy horses. So there's an alliance made here between a godly king and the most wicked king. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, how in the world was this alliance made? What in the world was Jehoshaphat thinking to align himself with Ahab of all people? Well, notice Ahab's pitch in verse 3. And he says this to his servants, but it's presented to Jehoshaphat too. But he says, Know ye that Ramoth in Gilead is ours? This city belongs to us. Ramoth Gilead belongs to us. And he's saying, and we're not doing anything about it. And we be still. And take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria. So Ahab is presenting an injustice. He's saying this isn't right. And it gets to Jehoshaphat. This isn't right. And if you read between the lines, who gave that land, who appointed that land to Israel? Who would have appointed that land to Israel? God would have. And so it's almost like Ahab saying, God gave this city to us, and those evil Syrians have it. We need to do the right thing and take back what God has rightfully given to us. Wow. This is so important. If you hold your place here, there's something very significant about that city, Ramoth Gilead, that's very important. Look in Deuteronomy chapter 4 for just a minute. If you hold your place here, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Now, God still hear some pages turning. But in the Old Testament, God had appointed certain cities in the land of Israel that were known to be cities of refuge. Does anybody remember a little bit about the stories of the cities of refuge in the Bible? A city of refuge. I'm really going to summarize this here, so you're going to have to go back and read it for yourself. But if a man, say, he had committed manslaughter, maybe not even, it wasn't premeditated murder, or maybe it was, an accidental death, he could flee to one of these cities of refuge, and that man would be protected. If he left that city of refuge, then his blood would be upon his own hands, if you will. The avenger of blood could execute him. So the city of refuge, these cities were places of mercy that God had given to a person, that if they had done something wrong, like manslaughter, they could flee to and find refuge and protection. Well, guess what one of those cities was? The name of one of those cities was Ramoth Gilead. And look what it says in verse 43 of Deuteronomy. Let's just start in verse number 41. Then Moses severed 3 cities on this side Jordan toward the sun rising, that the slayer might flee thither, which should kill his neighbor unawares, and hated him not in times past, and that fleeing unto one of these cities he might live, namely Bezer in the wilderness, in the plain country of the Reubenites, and Ramoth in Gilead of the Gadites, and Golan in Bashan of the Manassites. So Ramoth Gilead was one of these appointed cities of refuge. And the people of Israel did not have possession of this city. The Syrians did. So if we go back to 1 Kings chapter 22, we see why this city had some very significant meaning to the nation of Israel. It was a very important city. And Ahab presents it to his servants and to Jehoshaphat as a scriptural grievance. He's saying, the Syrians have our city of refuge. Help me, Jehoshaphat, take back God's city. So now we can begin to understand why Jehoshaphat would ever make an alliance with Ahab. I mean, he was a godly king, a good king. And Ahab presents this to him in a way that this cause looks righteous. But you can't forget that what Jehoshaphat is ultimately doing, he's making an alliance with someone that's evil and wicked. And you can't do that. So he was tricked a little bit here. Jehoshaphat falls for it. He makes this unity with Ahab. He's completely blinded here. He's seeing this as a good cause. This is a righteous thing to do. But what he should never do is make an alliance with someone who's evil and wicked like Ahab. Let's look at the alliance that he made in verse number 4. And boy, there's some unity here. I am as thou art, a godly king, aligning himself with one of the most wicked kings that there ever was, and he says, I am as thou art. My people as thy people, Ahab. My horses as thy horses. He's saying, you've got me, you've got my people, and you've got my army. So Ahab uses this righteous cause to drag Jehoshaphat into an ungodly alliance with him. And so here's a question that I have for you folks this morning. How does the world or our spiritual enemies, how do they use good causes to tempt believers into being unequally yoked with them in some kind of partnership today? How does the world use a righteous cause to convince God's people to join in an alliance with them? Have you ever done that? I can say I have, not to this degree, but I sure have. I was tricked. I thought, we're doing a good thing here. This is right. And so I agreed and went along with it. And then down the road, it cost me, and I had to pay for making that alliance. So maybe you can notice something, or off the top of your head, can you think of some ways that the world uses these good causes to have God's people make an alliance with them? Anything come to mind?
Well, there's been several attempts to get all of God's people together. I can't think of what they call it.
The ecumenical movements, Promise Keepers, something like that, maybe. What was you going to say?
Just come to mind how they want to use parts of Scripture to justify wrong, like loving one another, and don't judge, and
Yeah.
just to try to push. And there's so many churches that are pro-gay and stuff in the name of love.
Yeah. Here's a good thing. We're spreading the love of Jesus, And so everybody should come together and support this movement. Yeah, no, don't make an alliance like that.
Pastor, I guess, how did Jehoshaphat come to realize that Ahab was an evil king? I mean, what happened? I mean, after all, Ahab was leading Israel, who was a breakoff of the, and was supposed to be worshiping the same God. And so Jehoshaphat may not have been aware seem to be talking about.
It's possible.
Ahab's shortcomings. I just thought I'd throw that out.
It's possible. Verse 2, it says, and it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. Now, let me see. I thought Jehoshaphat took the throne in the 4th year of Ahab's reign, but here, so the reason I was saying that is if that's the case, Jehoshaphat would have known of Ahab's reign for several years. Well, Ahab had previously, he killed Naboth, remember Naboth's vineyard. I think Ahab had a reputation. He was married to Jezebel. It's possible he was just oblivious to all of these things. That's possible. Maybe I'm just making an assumption here that Jehoshaphat knew what kind of king Ahab really was.
It could also be the hope of Jehoshaphat that might help Ahab.
Yeah.
Lean towards his side instead of the opposite. 'Cause, I'm guilty of it too, right? We look like as Christians, we're guilty of trying to fit in hopes that we would gain them towards
Sure.
our way of thinking instead of their way of thinking.
And you want to see the good in other people. And you're thinking, well, hey, maybe Ahab's turning around here. Maybe he wants to get one of these cities of refuge back. He's wanting to follow God, but that's none of those things were even remotely close to the truth at all. But we have to be careful not to allow a good cause. That we're not deceived by a good cause that makes us make an alliance, an allegiance, a unity with someone that's evil or wicked or something like that. What's priority is not yoking yourself up, not being unequally yoked with some unbeliever. That's the priority. It doesn't matter if the cause is good. What trumps that, if you will, is would you be in an unequally yoked, situation, a believer with an unbeliever, someone that fears God and someone that really doesn't love the Lord at all? I think that's the main thing. And Jehoshaphat, he just kind of glossed over or didn't recognize that or something along those lines, where he said, you know what, I think this will be a good thing. Let's join up with Ahab. All right. When you think about an evil person in the world today, what name comes to mind? Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton wants to start a church in Clinton, Tennessee. And she calls you up and says, hey, Brother Jeff, hey, Brother Jose, Brother Lynn, Brother Jamie, you guys, will you help me build this church in Clinton? It's going to be a Baptist church. It's going to be a King James Bible church. It's going to be a soul-winning church. And Hillary Clinton wants to build a church, and she wants your help. Well, think about all the people we could reach. There's unlimited resources. There might be a ministry for... I'm not even going to go there. It's going to be something along the lines of suicide, but it's not really a funny joke. No, don't make that kind of alliance. What's right is right.
I think the next verse is where Jehoshaphat thinks will take a stick.
Yeah.
Verse 5.
Yep. Yep.
He left it up to Ahab to take a stick.
He did, and let's go to verse number 5, because what Jehoshaphat begins to do, he seeks the Lord, which is right, but he seeks the Lord after he's made up his mind, after the fact. after he gives Ahab his absolute commitment, then Jehoshaphat suddenly remembers his spiritual priorities. Look what it says in verse number 5. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, after he made this alliance. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today.
He just tells Ahab to pray. That's all he does.
It gets better. Yes. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together.
Jezebel's boy.
That's right, about 400 men, and said unto them, so Ahab gathers all his prophets together. Now, are these prophets of the Lord? No, they're not. But Ahab gets 400 prophets. Hopefully this will refresh your memory here. And he says, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, all 400 of them, go up, for the Lord, look how they dragged God into it, for the Lord shall deliver it into the hand of the king. And Jehoshaphat said, is there not here a prophet of the Lord besides? Isn't there a real prophet besides these prophets of Baal? That we might inquire of him. And the king of Israel said, remember this? And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, there is yet one man, Micaiah the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him. For he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say so. All right, I know we're overlapping content from when we were back at Ahab, but Jehoshaphat is seeking the Lord after he made a commitment here. How many times have we done that? We've made an agreement, and then all of a sudden we remember, oh, I was supposed to pray about this first. I was supposed to ask the Lord for direction. But I messed up, and I made an agreement first. He already said yes, but now he wants to pray about it. Now, what Ahab does here, when he gathers 400 of his own prophets, he just gets a group of men together to tell him what he wants to hear. That's it. These are his paid prophets. State-funded prophets. Do you think they're going to disagree with Ahab, the king? I mean, there's a penalty that could come there's a cost, there's a price that they might have to pay if they tell the king something he doesn't want to hear. And what might that price be? That's right, he could kill them. He could banish them from being a prophet and whatever. So he creates this echo chamber of people that's just going to tell him what he wants to hear. Repeat the same thing. But Jehoshaphat, he's got some discernment. He hears these 400 men using the Lord's name, but he knows there's no depth to it. And he says, is there not here a prophet of the Lord besides, that we may inquire of him? Now, Ahab says that there's one man, Micaiah. But notice what, in verse number 8, notice what Ahab says about Micaiah. He says, I hate him. And notice the reason why Ahab hates Micaiah. For he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. So really, why does Ahab hate Micaiah? It doesn't tell him what he wants to hear because he tells him the truth. And so Ahab hated the truth. He hated the truth. He didn't want the truth. The only thing Ahab wanted was a prophet who would bless the plans that he'd already made. So what's the point in even having prophets if you're going to do what you want to do anyway? It was you ever heard this phrase? It's a dog and pony show. I mean, that's what they do. These kings would sit on their throne. They already made up their mind that, let's go see what God has to say. And they'd pull in their 400 prophets, and they'd do it was a big show. I don't know all the details of what they did, but sometimes they would, they'd kill an animal, they'd pull out the liver, and they would, what did they call it? They'd read the liver of an animal. It was some pagan practice. And they'd say, well, God says this because of these features. Oh, yeah, go to Ramoth Gilead. Whatever. All right, let's pick up in verse number 13. Because Micaiah is brought before both kings here. And you've got to see the politics here. The idea is we want to hear from God, but they've already made up their minds. And so they get talked into inquiring from a real prophet of God. Now notice how this plays out. Let's pick up in let's just jump down to verse number 13. Because they send for Micaiah. And verse 13 says, and the messenger that was gone to call Micaiah spake unto him, saying, behold now, the words of the prophets declare good unto the king with one mouth. Let thy word, I pray thee, be like the word of one of them, and speak that which is good. What's going on here in this verse? He's being told what to say. Under the pretense of, we want to hear what God has to say. But they're saying, you better tell us what we want to hear. And all 400 of these prophets are saying the same thing. Micah, you tell us the same thing that they're telling, but we want to hear from God. No, they don't. All right, verse 14, Micah says, as the Lord liveth, what the Lord saith unto me, that will I speak. I'm just going to tell them what God says. But you've got to see, there's some humor that comes out in the next verses, or maybe sarcasm. And hopefully we've all got enough sense to see the sarcasm in the next verses. Verse 15, so he came to the king, and the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we forbear? And he answered him, go and prosper. For the Lord shall deliver it into the hand of the king. And we know this is sarcasm because notice what Ahab says in verse 16. And the king said unto him, how many times shall I adjure thee that thou tell me nothing but that which is true in the name of the Lord? He's like he said, you better, Ahab, after Micaiah tells him what he wants to hear, sarcastically, because he's saying, look, you've already made up your mind, Ahab. Why are you even calling me? Go on up to battle and prosper. And Ahab says, you better tell me the truth, buddy. And so verse 17, Micaiah says, I saw all Israel scattered upon the hills. You know, the army of Israel, they're all scattered, Ahab. And look what it says, as sheep that have not a shepherd. They're all of Israel, all scattered because their leader's gone. Well, who is the shepherd that Micaiah is talking about in verse 17? Ahab. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let them return every man to his house in peace. Micaiah is telling him, said, Ahab, you go to battle. God said, you're going to die. And all of Israel is going to be scattered. And verse 18, and the king of Israel, Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell thee that he would prophesy no good concerning me but evil? So I told you this is what he would say. So what Ahab does, did he receive Micaiah's prophecy or did he reject it here? He's rejecting it because if you read down a few verses here, let's see, verse 27. Notice what Ahab says to Micaiah. Thus saith the king, put this fellow in the prison. He says, you throw Micaiah in prison and feed him with bread of affliction and with water of affliction. And notice what he says, until I come in peace. And Micaiah said, if thou return it all in peace, the Lord hath not spoken by me. And he said, hearken, O people, every one of you. So he rejected him. So here's what we're seeing here. All of Ahab's false prophets are telling him exactly what he wants to hear. But Micaiah delivers a hard truth that makes Ahab angry. So here's a challenge for us. When we're seeking counsel, advice, and direction for a major decision in life, how can you be sure that you're not surrounding yourselves with people who are just going to bless your bad ideas? You've got to have some kind of security here, or you're going to fall into the same trap as Ahab. Just imagine how Ahab could justify his actions here. How could Ahab justify this? He sought counsel. So how could Ahab in his own mind justify going to battle? Somebody tell us. Think about that. How could he do that? It's 400 to 1. God's got to be on our side. That is exactly how he could justify it. There's 400 prophets. They know what they're talking about. I mean, we're going to battle. So we got to be careful that if we're not, when it comes to making a major decision, we're seeking advice and counsel from other people. We got to be careful that we're not getting advice from people that we know are going to tell us what we want to hear.
Micaiah should have been the only prophet that Jehoshaphat was concerned with. When he heard it, if he heard what Micaiah said,
Yep.
yeah, I'd want to back out of the deal.
I would want to back out of the deal. You're exactly right. Because really our study is about Jehoshaphat here more than it is Ahab. And Brother Larry, you hit the nail on the head. When Jehoshaphat heard that, he should have said, buddy, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. God's not in this. Well, he is, but he's not in it how you want him to be in it, so I'm out of here. So Jehoshaphat knows that if Ahab goes to battle, Ahab's going to die. He knows that. Well, look what he agrees to do in verse 29. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. They're going to go to battle anyway. Now, technically, God didn't say no. He just said, if you do, this is what's going to happen. I don't know. I guess Ahab could have justified it a little more and said, well, God didn't say no, I can't. Anyway, verse 30. And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and enter into the battle. But, this is the best part, put thou on thy robes. And the king of Israel disguised himself and went into the battle. Okay, so Ahab puts on a costume. And then Ahab tells Jehoshaphat, put on thy robes. What does he mean when he says that?
Let them know you're king.
Let them know you're the king. And Jehoshaphat knows that if they go to battle, who's going to die? For sure, absolutely, who's going to die? Ahab, the king of Israel. And Jehoshaphat goes to battle, and guess who's dressed up like a king? It's like, are you serious? Well, pick up in verse 31. But the king of Syria commanded his 32 captains that had rule over his chariots, saying, these are the commanders here, these are the people over people. And the king of Syria tells his leaders in his army, he says, fight neither with small nor great, save only with the king of Israel. He says, when you go to battle, you don't fight with anybody. You find the king and you kill him. That's what he's saying. And so when his army goes to battle, guess who they're going to go after? Just say it. Jehoshaphat. And he shouldn't even be out in the battle. You see what happens when we make an alliance? We become the target. All right, let's read a little bit more. Verse 32. And it came to pass, when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, that they said, obviously, this is what they would say, surely it is the king of Israel. Look, he's got his robes on, he's dressed like a king, let's go get him, guys. And they turned aside to fight against him. And Jehoshaphat, look what it says here, cried out. Now, I don't know what the man said, but verse 33 says, and it came to pass when the captains of the chariots perceived that it was not the king of Israel, that they turned back from pursuing him. It clicked in, they realized that this is not the king of Israel. I'm telling you, Jehoshaphat got by the skin of his teeth. He barely made it alive through this battle. Wow. So when Jehoshaphat goes to battle, Ahab disguises himself. Jehoshaphat's dressed up like the king, and he goes out to battle. If you will, what's painted on his back? A target. There's a bullseye right there on the man's back. Ahab's, it's like he's telling Jehoshaphat, Here, you wear all this shiny royal. You be the target, man. I'll hide among all the other people. All right, how might we make this applicable to us? The world will gladly be your friend as long as you are willing to take a bullet for them. But I appreciate that when Jehoshaphat cried out, God hears his cry. If you will, Jehoshaphat's about to die for another man's sins. And God intervenes. All right, let's close with this. Verse 34, and we saw this verse. It was so powerful when we were looking at Ahab in this chapter. But look at all the variables in verse 34. Ahab's disguised. And verse 34 says, a certain man drew a bow at venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Wherefore he said unto the driver of his chariot, turn thine hand and carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. Ahab dies later on in battle because of that wound. Ahab could not outsmart the prophecy of God. He couldn't outsmart God. Even with his disguise, he couldn't hide from God. It was a random shot. I mean, it was a random soldier, took a random shot, and he hit Ahab the king right in the weak spot of his armor. It was between the joints. It's an amazing. That soldier didn't even aim that arrow. But who did? He didn't need to. That arrow flies through the air. God guides it perfectly through a little gap in Ahab's armor. And the man bleeds to death just like God said. Wow. But again, the focus isn't as much this morning on Ahab as it is Jehoshaphat. He barely got by the skin of his teeth. He learned a lesson the hard way. His alliance, he said, I am as thou art. Those words kind of came to pass. I am as thou art. Almost got them. But the lesson is, when we compromise our separation, when we join an alliance with the world, we put a target on our back. Thankfully, we serve a God of mercy that hears us when we cry out for help, like Jehoshaphat did. I think that's just a wonderful account in the scriptures. And there's great truths in that chapter, because I can look back in my life and say, yeah, I remember that story. I remember that. It happened at this time and this place in my life, and I was Jehoshaphat all the way there. But hopefully we learn from those things. All right, we'll dismiss in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We ask for you to bless this lesson in Jesus Christ's name.